Hi, my name's Alicia.
Hey y'all, I'm Lofton.
So what is overamping?
Overamping is a term that folks use to talk about stimulant overdose. So overdosing on stimulants like meth, cocaine, crack, prescription stimulants like Adderall. So when somebody's overdosing on a downer like opioids, it's a central nervous system depressant. So what's happening is, your breathing is slowing, your heart rate is slowing, your body temperature is dropping, your blood pressure is dropping. What's happening with a stimulant overdose is pretty much the opposite of that. So your breathing is speeding up, your heart rate is increasing, your body temperature is rising, your blood pressure is rising. And what can happen is you can cross a threshold of that where you have a negative health consequence. So that can be something physical, like a heart attack, a seizure, or stroke, or overheating. Or it can be psychological, so experiencing things like paranoia and psychosis can also be symptoms of overamping. So it's kind of a more complex physiological situation than an overdose on an opioid is. So people will use the term overamping kind of to cover all of those different facets of it.
And some of the psychological effects, like shadow people, or hearing people talking trash in the other room, or any type of paranoia.
Yes.
That would be the same thing.
Yes, those would be some of those psychological symptoms. Believing that your friends are conspiring against you or things like that. It can be very stressful to experience.
Absolutely. Is overamping an overdose?
That's a good question. So, like I said, it's kind of a complicated situation. So lots of different things can happen that kind of fall under the umbrella of overamping. Overamping is not dose dependent. So that's a fancy way of saying that the drug that you're putting in your body, the amount of it matters, but also equally important is your general state of health and well-being. So you could be somebody who uses stimulants regularly. Maybe you smoke crack every day and you usually don't have any negative outcomes from that at all. Then one day you smoke the same amount you normally smoke and then you overamp and you have a heart attack or you experience paranoia or something like that. And that's because our general physical state feeds into a lot of how our body is responding to the drugs. So if somebody, if we're not sleeping for a while, if we've been up for several days, if we've fallen off on eating and drinking, if we're dehydrated, if we're just run down physically, if we're really stressed, if we're in a situation that we don't feel comfortable or safe, these are all sort of factors that can stress your body to the point where you're more likely to overamp. So you're more likely to experience one of those negative health consequences. And the opposite of that is true as well. So if you're doing things to protect yourself and take care of your health, that can really reduce your risk of overamping. It can be really protective to take basic care of yourself. So that's things like making sure that you're staying hydrated, especially in the summer. You're drinking lots of water. You're trying to eat as best you can, even if you're not hungry, remembering to do something regularly, like have an Ensure or a smoothie or something. Trying to sleep as much as possible. Trying to take breaks from using stimulants as much as possible. That helps your body maintain a level where it's not too stressed.
And if your friend is overamping, what does that look like?
So that's a good question. So it can look a lot of different ways depending on what's happening. The symptoms can be different. Sort of the situations where it's most urgent to call 911 are if somebody's having symptoms of a heart attack, a seizure, a stroke, or heat stroke or overheating. So unfortunately for overamping, because it's a more complicated physiological process, there's no magical drug like naloxone with an opioid overdose that will stop it while it's happening. Once you're having a heart attack, you're having a heart attack. So the best thing to do for people in those situations is to call 911 for help if you can, which can be a scary thing to think about doing. You don't want your friend to get in trouble, you don't want to get in trouble. There can be different things going on in this situation. It's good to know what protections you have and you don't have in that situation. So being familiar with the Good Samaritan law in your area and what protections it offers you and the victim of the overdose when you call for help is important. But just remembering that something like a heart attack is not something that we're able to manage on our own as lay people. We really need medical help for that.
If you're scared to call 911, you could always say, I choked on a lollipop, or my friend choked on a lollipop.
Yes, you don't need to give them specifics of the situation. You just need to let them know somebody's having a medical emergency and where you are.
Are there any laws that protect you
So in North Carolina, we have a Good Samaritan law. There's a version of that law in most states, and it says that if I'm with somebody who's overdosing on any kind of drug, and I call for help and I give my legal name, both me as the person who calls for help and the person who's experiencing the overdose, we have certain protections. So we have immunity from prosecution for small amounts of most drugs, not all drugs, for possession of paraphernalia, underage alcohol consumption, if that's a part of the situation. It also gives us protection if we're on parole and probation. So if I'm on parole or probation and one of the conditions is that I'm not supposed to be around drug use, as it typically is, that specific situation of either I overdose and somebody calls for me, or I call for help for somebody else who's overdosing, that can't be considered a new crime or a violation under the terms of my parole and probation. So it covers some specific things. It doesn't cover everything. It's not a get out of jail free card, but it's good to know what you do and don't have protections for in case you're ever in that situation where you have to make that judgment call.
And as far as overamping, the protections would come for cocaine, but not methamphetamine or crack cocaine.
Exactly. The way our statute is currently in North Carolina, it protects for less than a gram of cocaine, but not for any amount of crack or methamphetamine.
What are the symptoms of overamping?
So that depends on the situation. So if somebody's having a stroke, some of the big symptoms are like their speech becoming slurred, the movement on one side of their face or their body, so them not being able to move like one side of their face or one of their arms or legs is one of the big signs of a stroke, which is something that's happening in the brain. For a heart attack, a lot of times the person is becoming unresponsive. They're not breathing. For a seizure, sometimes there can be convulsing, sometimes not. For overheating, the person a lot of times will, become flushed and confused and dizzy. With overheating, if somebody reaches a temperature of 104, that's bad news. So you want to make sure that you're calling for help if somebody's approaching that temperature, if somebody's getting overheated. And some of the ways you can cool somebody down if they're experiencing overheating is you can get like cold cloths or ice packs, and you want to put them under their armpits or under their knees, on the back of their neck. Try to get them to a cool place. Use like fans and mists to cool them down. Help them drink, if they're conscious, help them drink water or Gatorade.
The electrolytes are very important.
The electrolytes are important, yeah.
So I went to prison for methamphetamine, and it was interesting because when I got out, after talking to my mother, I found out that when I was younger, I was diagnosed as ADHD, but she didn't want to put me on medication. And I actually went to a doctor, and I ended up getting a prescription, and it's helped me just in general, because the whole reason I even started using methamphetamine was because I was a starter of projects. That's it. Not a finisher, just a starter. You know what I mean? So I'd have all this stuff started. And then with that substance, I would start finishing the projects. And so it was really, I'm not necessarily sure if that is a one-all, fix-all Band-Aid. It's probably not, because everybody's different. I know for myself personally, that was very helpful.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if somebody's struggling with stimulant use, talking to a doctor, talking to a therapist, seeing if there are underlying things like ADHD that could be treated in other ways, thinking about the role that the stimulant plays in your life and like what other things you could think about that could fill that role can be helpful, sounds like.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they're actually doing testing, or they're doing some trials, I think, as far as medicated assisted treatment at the moment, but nothing concrete yet.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was an awesome conversation with you, Lofton.
Thank you, Alicia. It was great talking with you.